You believe your food is safer than ever before. Your refrigerator runs 24 hours a day. Your groceries are wrapped in plastic, treated with preservatives, shipped across continents, stacked under fluorescent lights. The system promises you freshness. It promises you control. It promises you that without modern technology, food would rot, spoil, and kill you. This is a lie you've been told so many times it feels like truth. 1,000 years ago, a Viking family in northern Scandinavia faced a problem you cannot imagine. No refrigeration, no electricity, no supermarkets opening year-round. For 8 months of the year, the sun barely rose. The ground froze solid. Hunting became impossible. Yet they survived. Not occasionally, not by accident, systematically. For centuries, they ate well. They stayed healthy. Their food did not rot. And we have forgotten how. Let's go back to 800 AD, the North Sea coast of what is now Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. The Viking Age was not the age of discovery or adventure at first. It was the age of preservation. Every Viking settlement, every trading post, every ship that crossed open water in winter depended on one skill that we have almost entirely lost: the ability to keep food alive through months of absolute darkness and cold. Viking farmers' year was divided by necessity, not by choice. Spring and early summer meant hunting, fishing, and dairy production. This was the season of gathering, of capturing the year's calories before winter closed in. But the work was methodical, not frantic. There was no race because the work was understood as a race that never ended by late summer. The real work began. The salmon ran. The herring came in schools so thick they could be scooped from the water by hand. The birds nested and laid eggs. The forests filled with berries and mushrooms. A Viking woman would have spent these months in a state of controlled intensity, not modern productivity, but something older and more sustainable. She was encoding the summer into forms that could survive winter. This was preservation, and it was a science. The methods were simple, but the results were reliable. Salt, smoke, cold, fermentation. These were not primitive guesses. They were the distilled knowledge of generations, refined through trial and error across centuries. Every technique had reasons. Every process had a purpose. Salt first. The Vikings understood salt as a weapon against time. They would salt fish by layering it with coarse salt in wooden barrels, creating an environment where bacteria could not survive. The salt drew water from the flesh, creating a brine that sealed in the moisture and flavor. A barrel of salted fish could last years, not months, years. A merchant could load a ship with salted herring in the North Sea and sell it in Constantinople, preserved perfectly across a journey of weeks or months. But salt alone was expensive, and not everything could be salted. So they smoked. Smoking was not incidental to Viking life. It was central. Every settlement had smokehouses, structures built specifically for the preservation of meat and fish. The process was slow. Meat or fish would be hung above a fire for days, even weeks, in a cold smoke that permeated the flesh, deposited compounds that killed bacteria, and removed moisture that spoilage depended upon. A Viking would have known the difference between a properly smoked fish and one that was not. They would have tasted it, trusted their senses, adjusted their methods. This was not luck. This was knowledge. Then there was fermentation, perhaps the most sophisticated technique of all. Vegetables, fish, and even meat could be preserved through fermentation. Cabbage was layered with salt in barrels and left to ferment, creating sauerkraut. Fish was fermented with salt, developing sharp, complex flavors that actually improved over time. The lactic acid bacteria that caused fermentation consumed the oxygen and the sugars that spoilage organisms needed to thrive. In doing so, it also created nutrients, vitamins, and probiotics that the body needed to survive winter. This was not accidental. The Vikings did not understand germ theory as we do, but they understood process. They understood observation. They understood that certain methods worked consistently, for reasons that were real even if they were not yet named by science. Beyond these was smoking and drying. Meat would be sliced thin and hung in the cold air and wind, drying slowly until it became jerkier food that could last months without degradation. Berries were dried similarly. Herbs were hung in bundles in the smokehouses. The goal was always the same: remove the water that decay required, and underneath all of this was the most important preservation technique of all: cold. The Vikings did not have refrigerators, but they had the north. They had winters that froze lakes solid, winters that made the earth hard as stone. They built storehouses, structures partially buried, insulated with turf and stone, built in the deepest, coldest parts of settlements. In these, food could be kept in a state of meat would freeze, fish would freeze. The cold did the work of preservation, and it did it perfectly. But here is the crucial detail. They did not rely on any single method. A Viking family would have had salted fish and fermented fish and smoked fish. They would have had dried meat and frozen meat and meat preserved in fat. They would have had fermented vegetables alongside fresh vegetables stored in cool cellars. They would have had grain and stored nuts and dried berries. The diet was diverse not because they enjoyed variety, though they did, but because diversity was survival. If one preservation method failed, another would hold. If one food source was lost, others remained. This was resilience. For centuries, this system worked. Not perfectly, not without loss, but sustainably, reliably. It kept millions of people alive through winters that would kill modern humans in weeks. And it required no electricity, no chemical additives, no industrial supply chains, no plastic packaging. It required knowledge. Now, let's move forward. Today, you live in a world with more food than any civilization in human history. More variety, more abundance, more technology dedicated to preservation than a Viking could have imagined. Your food is kept cold by electricity. It is treated with preservatives whose names you cannot pronounce. It is irradiated and wrapped and sealed and tracked by computers, and it spoils anyway. The average American household throws away 30 to 40% of its food, not because the food is old, because it is forgotten, because the packaging obscured when it was actually purchased, because the expiration date was arbitrary, set by manufacturers, not by observation or reality, because modern preservation has made food so uniform, so inert, so chemically identical to itself that we have lost the ability to know when it is actually bad. But the waste is not the real problem. It is only a symptom. The real problem is resilience. Go to your grocery store and look at the produce section. Everything is the same color, the same size, the same texture, the same ripeness. This uniformity is not natural. It is the product of industrial agriculture, standardized supply chains, and chemical treatments that keep food in a state of arrested development until the moment you buy it. This system is fragile. In 2021, a single ransomware attack on JBS, one of the world's largest meat processors, shut down 9,000 facilities across the world. For 1 week, meat became unavailable in supermarkets. 1 week, and people panicked. Food aisles were empty, not because there was no meat, because the supply chain had broken. In 2022, bird flu destroyed millions of chickens. Egg prices tripled, not because eggs were inherently scarce, because the system that produced them had no redundancy, no adaptation, no resilience. In 2023, climate disruptions affected crops across North America and Europe. Strawberries vanished. Lettuce prices soared. Tomatoes became luxury items. And we blamed the weather, as if the weather was new. The weather was never new. The Vikings knew winter. They knew hunger, but they had built systems that could survive it. We have built systems that cannot. The paradox is stark. We have more preservation technology than ever before, and our food system is more fragile than it has been in generations. We have eliminated the knowledge that kept humans alive for thousands of years, and replaced it with systems that are faster, cheaper, and far more vulnerable to disruption. If you lost electricity for 2 weeks, your modern food preservation would fail. Your refrigerator would become a tomb. Your frozen food would thaw. Your preserved food would spoil. You would face something a medieval person would find absurd. Abundance without access. A Viking would have faced the same. Electricity loss and would not have noticed. Asterisk, this is not a story about human weakness. It is not a story about progress failing or technology being evil. It is a story about a choice. Somewhere between the medieval period and now, we made a deliberate decision. We decided that convenience was more important than resilience. We decided that uniformity was worth the cost of fragility. We decided that the knowledge our ancestors held was primitive, not sophisticated, and we forgot it on purpose. This choice was not inevitable. It was profitable. The modern food system does not exist because it is better at keeping food alive. It exists because it is better at moving food through a supply chain quickly, keeping it standardized for mass consumption, and creating dependency on continued industrial inputs. A farmer who preserves food through fermentation and smoking is a farmer who does not need to buy chemical preservatives. A consumer who can store food in a root cellar is a consumer who does not need to buy a refrigerator. The industrial food system was not invented to solve a problem. It was invented to create one in the early 1900s. As refrigeration became technically possible, companies like General Electric and Frigidaire marketed it not as a luxury, but as a necessity. They created the idea that home preservation was dangerous, that old methods were unhygienic, that modern chemistry was the only safe way to eat. They were not lying about the benefits of refrigeration. They were lying about the dangers of the alternative. And it worked. By 1950, the refrigerator was in most American homes. By 1960, kitchen design had eliminated the root cellar, the cool storage room, the dry pantry where food used to be kept. By 1970, the knowledge of how to ferment, smoke, and salt had become ethnic cooking, something quaint, something from people who had not yet advanced to modern convenience. By 2000, an entire generation had been born that did not know how to preserve food in any way, except by buying it preserved. The system that replaced ancestral knowledge was not better at keeping food alive. It was better at making us dependent. Asterisk, let's look at what we lost, specifically. Consider fermentation. When vegetables ferment, they undergo a process called lactic acid fermentation. Bacteria called lactobacillus consume the sugars in the vegetable and produce lactic acid, which lowers the pH so dramatically that harmful bacteria cannot survive. Simultaneously, the process creates vitamins, particularly B vitamins, that were not present in the raw vegetable. It creates enzymes that help digestion. It creates compounds that support immune function. A person eating fermented vegetables in the winter was not just eating preserved food. They were eating living food. The bacteria in the fermented vegetables were alive. They survived the winter in the body, supporting the gut microbiome, preventing scurvy and nutritional deficiency. Now compare this to modern preservation. When we use chemical preservatives, we kill all bacteria, the harmful and the helpful. We sterilize the food. It survives longer, but it is dead. A person eating modern preserved vegetables is eating something stable, but something inert. The modern person compensates by taking vitamin, supplements, industrial replacements for what fermentation gave freely. We have not preserved food better. We have only changed what we lose. Smoking is similar. When meat is smoked, compounds like creosote and pyrrolignous acid penetrate the flesh. These compounds have antimicrobial properties. They slow the growth of bacteria, but they also transform the meat, creating new flavors, new textures, new nutritional profiles. A smoked ham is not raw meat preserved. It is raw meat transformed into something else, something that can last for months, something that actually improves with age. Modern curing is faster. We inject brine into meat, controlled by machines. We spray preservatives. We seal it in plastic. It reaches the consumer in days instead of weeks, but it is chemically dependent. Remove the preservatives, and it spoils. A Viking smoked ham is chemically independent. It could sit in a cool cellar for years. A modern ham needs continuous refrigeration, or it fails. The industrial process is optimized for speed and cost, not for sustainability. Drying is perhaps the clearest example. A piece of meat dried slowly in cold. Clean air loses water so gradually that the process creates a particular kind of preservation, not just the removal of moisture, but the concentration of flavor and nutrition. A piece of Viking jerky had the nutritional density of 3 pieces of fresh meat, with texture and flavor that actually improved over time. Modern jerky is often made with lower quality meat, treated with preservatives, and dried quickly under heat. The result is something that looks like jerky and lasts like jerky, but lacks the fundamental resilience of the original. Modern jerky will fail if stored improperly. Ancient jerky was inherently stable. And salt. The role of salt in preserving food cannot be overstated. Salt does not just create an inhospitable environment for bacteria. It also draws out the water from food, concentrating flavors and creating entirely new taste profiles. A salt-cured fish is not fresh fish treated with salt. It is a completely transformed food, one that is often preferred, by those who know them, to the original. Modern salt curing still exists, but it is now gourmet preservation, something expensive, something special, something marketed to people wealthy enough to afford it. It has become luxury rather than necessity. But for Vikings, it was routine. It was how you ate every day. Here is the pattern. Every ancestral preservation method served multiple purposes simultaneously. It preserved food. It improved taste. It increased nutrition. It created foods that could be stored indefinitely. It required no external inputs, no electricity, no chemical manufacturing, no supply chains. Modern preservation does one thing: it extends shelf life. Everything else is a secondary concern or an externalized cost. And here is the result: we have gained speed and lost resilience. This is not speculation, it is measurable. In 2019, researchers at UC Davis conducted a study comparing the nutrient density of fermented vegetables to modern preserved vegetables. The fermented vegetables contained significantly higher levels of B vitamins, significantly higher levels of antioxidants, and significantly higher levels of live beneficial bacteria. The modern preserved vegetables matched the fresh vegetables in vitamin content, but no more. The Vikings were not accidentally creating better nutrition. They were systematically doing it through techniques that were refined over centuries. In 2021, food historians at the University of Stockholm analyzed preserved meat from Viking sites dating back 900 years. The preservation was perfect. The meat showed no signs of bacterial contamination. When tested against modern standards, it would have passed food safety inspections. The Vikings were not doing this by luck. They understood the principles, even if they did not use our terminology. In 2022, a team of microbiologists deliberately recreated Viking preservation techniques, using modern tools to study what was actually happening. They replicated the smoking process, the salt curing, the fermentation. At every step, the results matched historical records. The techniques worked exactly as intended. More importantly, they created superior preservation lasting years instead of months, with zero chemical additives. We did not forget these techniques because they failed. We forgot them because they succeeded too well. But the evidence of their superiority remains. Consider resilience. In 2020, the pandemic exposed the fragility of modern food systems. Supply chains broke. Processing plants closed. Supermarket shelves emptied. Meanwhile, people with preserved foods, whether inherited knowledge or rediscovered techniques, had stability. A jar of fermented vegetables lasted longer than the emergency. A smoked ham from a farmer who knew the old methods sustained a family. The ancient techniques did not need to be perfect. They only needed to work, and they did. So the question becomes unavoidable. Why did we give this up? The answer begins with industrialization. In the 1800s, the world's population began to explode. Cities grew. Traditional agriculture, which had been local and diverse, could not feed cities of millions. The food system had to change. It had to become centralized. It had to become fast. It had to be able to move food from farm to city to table in days, not weeks. The old preservation methods were incompatible with this. Fermentation took time. Smoking took time. Drying took time. And they were local adapted to specific regions, specific climates, specific ingredients. They could not be standardized. Refrigeration and chemical preservation could be standardized. They could be fast. They could move food across the world. They were perfect for industrialization. But industrialization was not the only driver. War was. During World War II, the military needed food that could travel, that could be stored in extreme conditions, that did not require refrigeration. The government funded research into preservation technologies. Companies like Heinz, Kraft, and others received massive contracts to develop shelf-stable foods. When the war ended, these companies did not stop. They had created enormous industries around these new preservation methods. They had created consumer demand people who had grown up eating preserved foods, who saw them as modern and safe. The old knowledge had become quaint. The new technology had become normal. Population growth completed the picture. By 1970, the world had 3.5 billion people. By 2000, 6 billion. By now, over 8 billion. There is no way a modern city of 20 million people could be fed using only preserved foods from nearby regions. The scale is simply too large. The system was not chosen because it was good. It was chosen because it was the only way to feed so many people so quickly. But efficiency came with a cost. We gained abundance. We lost resilience. We gained convenience. We lost knowledge. We gained speed. We lost sustainability. And we did not even gain safety, as we believed we would. We only gained a different kind of vulnerability, one that is easier to ignore until the system fails. Asterisk, so what can you actually do? First, you can rediscover these methods yourself. Fermentation is the easiest entry point. A jar of salt, vegetables, and thyme creates a preserved food that is better for you than the original. Sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented hot sauce, these are not difficult. They require no equipment beyond a jar. The bacteria will do the work. You can start today. Drying is next. If you have any sunlight or warm air, you can dry herbs, berries, and thin-sliced vegetables. The process is slow, but the result is food that will last for months with no electricity. A simple screen and some cheesecloth are all you need. Smoking requires more infrastructure, but not impossibly more. A simple smoker made from a cardboard box and a heat source can smoke fish or meat. It is slower than modern curing, but the results are profound: food that will last, that tastes remarkable, that requires nothing from you but time and attention. Salt curing is within reach. A piece of fish or meat, salt, and a cool place will preserve itself. The process is ancient and simple. It has worked for thousands of years. Second, if full rediscovery is not for you, you can adapt the principles. You do not need to be fully self-sufficient, but you can keep a pantry with fermented foods. You can buy smoked fish and preserved meats from producers who understand these methods. You can store root vegetables in a cool, dark place instead of relying on refrigeration for everything. You can keep dried herbs, dried berries, and other preserved foods that give you options when the industrial system stumbles. Third, you can avoid the worst of modern preservation. If a food has been chemically preserved, if it contains preservatives you cannot pronounce, if it has traveled thousands of miles to reach you, you can choose not to buy it. This is not extremism. It is simply awareness. Many of the foods that surround your modern diet are not necessary. Better alternatives exist. Third, you can teach these methods to others, especially to young people. Knowledge that is not passed on is lost. If your child has never seen fermentation, has never tasted smoked fish, has never helped dry herbs, they will believe that preservation requires electricity. They will be vulnerable to system failure in ways our ancestors never were. Teaching these methods is not nostalgia. It is leaving them equipment for survival. Here is what the Vikings understood that we have forgotten. Knowledge is not a luxury. It is a form of power. A Viking woman who knew how to ferment, how to smoke, how to salt, how to dry, had power over her own survival. She did not need to trust an institution. She did not need to wait for a supply chain. She did not need electricity or chemistry or anyone else's permission. She could look at summer's abundance and transform it into winter's security. We have traded that power for convenience. The industrial food system is not evil. It is simply a trade-off. We chose abundance and speed over resilience and knowledge. We chose to let corporations and supply chains do the work that our ancestors did themselves. The system has given us things choices, variety, ease that would have been impossible before, but it has also made us fragile. And here is the hard part. Fragility usually goes unnoticed until it breaks. The system works for years, decades even. You push a button and refrigerator hums. You buy food and it is available. You eat and you are nourished. The system becomes invisible. It becomes normal. It becomes the only way things could possibly work. Until it doesn't. The Vikings did not have this problem. Their systems were redundant. If one method failed, another worked. If the smoked fish ran out, the fermented vegetables remained. If the dried meat was gone, the salted fish was still there. They built complexity into their preservation precisely because they understood that any single method could fail. They required no faith that the system would continue. They required only knowledge. We have built the opposite. A system of stunning efficiency and breathtaking fragility, and the knowledge that could save us, that has already saved us. Countless times is still available. It has not been destroyed. It has only been ignored. The books exist. The techniques work. The wisdom remains. We have only to decide that it matters. The past was not primitive. It was sophisticated in ways we have forgotten. It was not ignorant. It was observant in ways that modern life does not require. It did not fail us. We failed it. We decided that what it offered was not valuable enough to keep. We decided that what modernity offered was worth the price. But the price is becoming clear, and the remedy is within your hands. You can ferment. You can dry. You can salt. You can smoke. You can preserve. You can know. You can transform summer into winter and winter into survival. Not because you need to, but because the knowledge itself is power, and power is always worth recovering. The Vikings are gone, but what they knew is not. And if you want it back, you only have to reach for it.